this is another cool observation that may make you laugh, is that when I first got here, I moved February 2020. Okay, pre kind of pandemic, right? And so I honestly don't know what Tennessee is. I mean, now we're learning it, but at the time, a tornado happened, Nashville, all kinds of events were happening, and then COVID hits, and it's funny how I would say middle northern Tennesseans respond to things, and I tell people this all the time, how I experience people, okay, you know what, my first reaction is I'm going to stock up, buy everything, put it in my bunker, and we're just this is World War Z. And then within 30 days later, pandemic doesn't exist. I don't want to wear a mask. This is not
I've never worn a mask. Ever. And it's like when things were happening in Nashville, I just stayed out here.
Yeah.
I mean, and I always thought it was funny because when people started talking about like ivermectin, they're like, "Oh my God, do you have any ivermectin?" I'm like, "There's probably a half gallon in the refrigerator in the barn. Like, we use it to worm cows. Like, sure, no problem."
Yeah.
But and I never was afraid.
Right.
You talk about stocking your bunker. I mean, my bunker stopped all the time. I mean, if you look right there, like, there are cows. Like, are you hungry? Let's come on, we'll take one up here and put it in the back of the truck. Like, no problem.
Yeah.
Steak or roast. Like, do you need some vegetables? It's like my neighbors over here. All of this is vegetables for Hancock Family Farms.
Wow.
So, like, I live in the middle of a grocery store.
Yeah.
Like, I don't care if there's a pandemic. Go ahead.
Yeah.
People have been living here off their neighbors for generations. Like that sense of community we were talking about earlier. It's like the only people that got really panicky were the people that moved here and don't know their neighbors, or or they don't see the opportunity to like eat the animals in their front yard.
I would say it's more that.
Yeah.
I would say it's more that. The people that I talked to is like, like their bunker is not even in White House or Cross Plains. It's Westmoreland. I'm gonna get out of here. And I'm like, okay.
But they're going back home. They're going where their people are. If they're going to if their bunkers in Westmoreland, as I always say, West by God, like it's because your people are there.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it would be, my people are here.
What do you think? For me, the frustrating thing has been, I guess I haven't understood Southern hospitality. I know it exists, and I get it from more of like the older generation, but I look at this newer generation in terms of Southern hospitality. It doesn't exist. They are.
They're just like if their granny was around, she would smack them on the back of the head and tell them to straighten up.
Yeah.
And I think it's just because it's being diluted. As people have moved off the farm and have become more urbanized.
Yeah.
And I don't think people do it on purpose. People are just oblivious to like other human beings around them. Like, it's not like, because like, if you come into my house right now, I will fix you a glass of tea, and if you're hungry, I will make you a pan of biscuits, or we will dig through the refrigerator. Like, I will feed you like you're starving. People don't eat that way too much anymore.
Right.
They've gotten into the modern conveniences of going to Colorado Grill. Like, let's have a family outing. We're going to order Kentucky Fried Chicken. Like, heck, who wants to eat that?
Nobody.
But if you go by the drive-through line on any given day, I mean, it's wrapped around the building. It's like, I ain't eating that.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting.
If I want fried chicken, I'm going to go to Baldwin's or Douglas, or better yet, I'm going to go to the neighbor's house and get a chicken and cut it up fried.
Whew.
And people think, and I guess it is cheaper than living in California, but they
by far. No, it is so much more cheaper. I think I still have family back home, and even now it's just I have a brother who his heart desire was to buy a home, right, and to live that American dream, but he's making he's making good money, but yet he's got 3 kids and he still can't buy a home. I've been in Tennessee for 2 years, and I already bought my first home. You know, and I think it's just like, when I look at those two things, it's just like, wow, you know, Tennessee just made it more easier. You know, the scary part is everyone says, well, you're going to make less money. Oh, you're not going to make as much money as you would make here.
Usually homes are not investments in your wealth. They're investments in your family and creating a sense of stability and it's like, come up here, little puppy, and creating a sense of community. And
Yeah.
it's like when people are able to purchase land, whether it be a house or, you know, and have like that sense of ownership, then you get to be part of the community. I mean, like you've put down roots.
Yeah.
And, you know, and I guess here, I have an aunt that's, she lives in Glendale, in, you know, like in LA, and it's crazy. I remember the first time I went out there and I was like, you paid $1 million for this? Like, your swimming pool that you guys brag about is the size of a bird bath.
Yeah.
Like, this is not a swimming pool. Like, you can't even roll over in it.
Honestly, I mean, I haven't been here long enough to fully, I guess, you're gonna hear what I'm saying. It's more like naive, but like, the weather here is more exciting for me, because these are things that I didn't experience back home. Like, you know, you talk about like a California drought, like it exists. So like, our rain is like, it's exciting that we got like a few, maybe half an inch of rain. It'd be like we're posting on Facebook, oh, it's raining outside, and everyone goes looks. You know, here it's just like, okay, not only does it rain, but it's like a thunderstorm. And I remember I was like, ooh, it's a tornado warning. And you like, just the inside of like, what does that even look like?
Right, that's what it look. That's one of the things I missed on the West Coast is like, is a good thunderstorm. And
Yeah.
Like, and as a kid, my granddaddy had swings made that were long enough that you could lay down in.
Oh.
So on the back porch, you would take a quilt and a blanket and lay down in the swing and listen to it rain. Like,
Wow.
and when you move to Alaska, like, if thunder, snow, but you never have like a thunderstorm. And I used to like laugh, kind of like, oh, it's a tornado, everybody's scared. But here lately, you can't really make a joke about it anymore. It's like, yeah, maybe you should.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But still, I mean, you know, I think it was just, those are things like moving here, like they're now for me exciting in a sense. You know, and again, like you're saying, I don't want to be not sensitive to the harsh reality, but it's just like, whoa, this is so new or different. Like, back home, everyone's like, oh, well, you guys have to suffer from earthquakes. It's like, that doesn't really, it happens, but it's like, it's not like an everyday thing or even a season thing. It's just random.
But that's like the way with tornadoes here.
Sure.
I mean, it's like, it's not not like once a week we have a tornado. And when you have a big one that's damaging, it's like, it's really damaging. Same as when you have an earthquake. You have a lot of little ones and everybody's like, whatever. You know, like, you don't even spill your coffee when you're driving. You just like, boom, and keep going.
Yeah.
Which is kind of the way it is with a tornado or a thunderstorm here. It's like, oh yeah, it's raining and you keep going. But then every now and then you have one that's like catastrophic and it makes the news and it's like, well, maybe it's not so funny.
It isn't. It's a real thing, for sure.
So I
Go ahead.
moved from Tennessee to Alaska when I was 24.
Yeah.
And when I got to Alaska, then you start talking about like being from Tennessee.
Yeah.
And, you know, the world takes you in a big fat circle. So I moved from Tennessee to Alaska, from Alaska to Utah, from Utah to Tennessee, from Tennessee back to Alaska, from Alaska back to Tennessee to Oregon, back to Tennessee. So
Wow.
like, I'm like,
Okay, so with all those, you know, states in mind, what is your favorite state?
delusion. I just like to.
I'm sure you would get delusion being in the middle of nowhere. I mean, you think this is the middle of nowhere, but I imagine Anchorage, Alaska.
Oh no, I've been like in the middle of the Canadian Yukon when it was 65 below zero. Like I've truly been where like the middle of nowhere. Like
No, thank you.
this is a metropolitan city. It's like we can live here like no problem. But you know, like always when I was off somewhere, you know, it was interesting. People would ask me, they would go, "What country are you from?" And I was like, "What?" And they would, "Well, what country are you from? You talk funny." And it finally dawned on me. I was like, "Oh, you mean you've never heard a Southern accent, like a real one? So like you think I'm from a foreign country, not like Tennessee or the South." So then I would tell them, "Well, I'm from Tennessee," and they're like, "Isn't that south of here?" I'm like, well, technically we're in Alaska, so everything is south of here. So yeah, of course we're Southerners. But you know, like when you're here and you're me, as I always tell stories, you always talk to people. So I'd always talk about like what my granny was doing or what my granddaddy was doing, or you know, like who's, you know, you always stay connected because all of my family has been in Tennessee since before Tennessee was a state. And other than me and maybe my grandparents for a little while they were pipelining or working or something, nobody ever left. It's like you either age out and die or you're still alive and you're here. I think my whole family lives within about a 10 or 15 mile radius of here.
Wow.
Like, so my brother lives in Portland, Tennessee. My daddy lives in Cedar Hill. My uncle lives across the field. My aunt lives on East Robertson Road. So like everybody's still here.
Very cool.
So, you know,
that's actually kind of funny because you're not the first person to tell me like no one ever branches out, you know. And I was like, what do you mean you don't branch out? Like there's such a world out there.
Absolutely.
And like for me, that's why I was explaining to you earlier about like the narrow-minded, because you've never branched out. You know, I always thought, you know, especially like moving here, it's like I had a narrow-minded of what Tennessee maybe was like. You know, until I was like, oh, this is why they think that. You know, this is why the whole red, blue, whatever. You know, like, oh, it's not because of, you know, this. It's just the way of life here is so different.
Well, and I think, you know, like what people take for granted is that people have been here for generations.
Yeah.
And sometimes people show up and stay, and sometimes people show up and they stay for a little while and then they leave. And, you know, like I knew this lady, her name was Carney Ferris, and they had a farm next door to my granddaddy's farm, and they lived there for 35 years. And you would ask her where she's from, and she would say Nashville. Even though she lived like the majority of her like adult life in Orlando, she still considered herself from somewhere else.
Yeah.
And she never really felt like she belonged.
Yeah.
And I think when you come, it's like you have to learn how to integrate. And it's not that people are being exclusionary on purpose. It's like they just don't know there's like other people around. They go to the same ball games, they shop at the same grocery stores, their kids play on the same little league teams as they played on. It's like it's not on purpose, it's just, you know, by default.
Yeah.
Okay. So thanks for coming out, Daniel.
Thank you.
Next time you come out, we're going to have dinner. Bring your wife, and we're going to talk about local food. And I usually eat dinner every night at my grandmother's kitchen table, so come back and have dinner.
That sounds exciting.